Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Not Quite Enough Yarn, a knitting, crochet and general craft blog from the south coast of England. My name's Leslie, otherwise known on Ravelry as Lahlah, that's spelt with H's, they're L-A-H-L-A-H, there is an L-A-L-A. And on Twitter I'm Knitting or Death, but I'm much more active on Ravelry than anywhere else. Thank you very much for stopping by. The intention is to make this a monthly podcast. I'll probably record it throughout the month, but I'll try and keep the editing fairly simple. We don't want it looking like an early episode of NYPD Blue, not about knitting. So hopefully a monthly podcast with a bit of content of stuff I'm working on and stuff I'm using up. Now, as this is my first episode, probably makes sense if I tell you a little bit about my background. It's a cupboard, it's got yarn in. And that's pretty much all you need to know. Seriously, I've been knitting since I was 4. I'm now 50. I've been crocheting since I was about 5. And throughout that time, I've also done some designing. I've been published in Let's Knit magazine, in Inside Crochet, in Crochet Now, and a couple of books as well. Mostly I got into designing because I couldn't find anything, well, probably to fit me. As you can see, I'm a traditionally upholstered woman, and I would design things because I couldn't find patterns to fit, so I would either adapt what I had or design something from scratch. Now behind me is cupboard number 1. There are 2 cupboards with yarn in this house, and there are bags full of yarn as well. So this is partly a podcast about my 2018 yarn diet, and I know it's New Year, New Me, but everyone's going on a yarn diet. It's about what's right for the individual, and I think 2 cupboards is enough for me, so I would like to get my stash down to fitting into cupboards 1 and 2. Now, that's very much a personal choice. Some people, their stash is too big if it goes over 2 boxes. Some people can fit theirs into 2 rooms and more. Personal choice. For me, these are my limits. Now, given that I've got so much yarn and I'm looking to use it up, you might be wondering why the podcast is called Not Quite Enough Yarn. That's because the way I buy yarn it's not very scientific. So I see something that I like and I think, oh, pretty, and that's what I buy. So this means I have a lot of single skeins, I have a lot of 2 or 3 balls of yarns, but very rarely do I have a sweater quantity of anything. This means that I am very big on stripes and colour blocks, and the sweater I'm wearing is a case in point. Now this is a jacket cardigan that I made for my sister. It's very old. I must have made it about 10-15 years ago. And she wanted a blue zip-up cardigan with cables down the side. Your wish is my command, sister. A few years ago she lost a load of weight, which means that she's now too slim for this. It hangs off her. She's happy she's lost weight. She gave me the cardigan back. I'm happy too. Everyone's a winner. But this shows what I'm like, in as much as this was made from a big ball Aran acrylic. Made it at the time. I don't think I had a lot of money, so I bought some fairly inexpensive but quite hard-wearing yarn. But of course there wasn't enough for the entire cardigan, hence the stripes and the contrast collar. Now, I like to call it a design feature, but it is really necessity being the mother of invention. Like a lot of crocheters and knitters, I've accumulated a lot of stash over the years, and up to a point, I'm fine with that. But something happened just recently that made me really start thinking about using up what I've got. I'd like to say it was something noble, like concern about the planet's resources. Unfortunately, I'm far too shallow for that. It was this. This is some merino lace weight yarn that I bought on holiday in Canada about 2010, I think we were there. And as you can see, it's a lovely colour and it's merino, so it's a beautifully soft yarn. Not long after I bought it, I tried something with it which didn't really work. This is not unusual for me. I'll try things out. If they're working, I'll do them. If not, life is too short to spend a lot of time making something that you're not going to use or enjoy. So I decided to put it to one side until another brilliant idea came up. The use of the word brilliant is my choice. About a month ago, I thought I would use some of this, and as soon as I did, it started falling apart. Now, it's a very fine yarn. I also made the mistake of putting it into this yarn cake at the time, which really wasn't the smartest move. It's a fine yarn and it's best kept in the skein because that keeps the fibres relaxed. Putting them into a yarn cake can stretch them slightly, I believe, and certainly in this case it appears to have done that, because as soon as I started using it, it started to break. And I was using it doubled with something else. So thought, well, I'll carry on. But it kept breaking and kept breaking. And so I came to the conclusion that I could end up making something, spending a lot of hours making something, hopefully be pleased with the result, but find that it wouldn't last terribly long because what I'm guessing is moths have got to this. Well, that's very, very disappointing because it is a lovely yarn. I really like the colour, but we have to be realistic. And so I'm afraid this yarn is no more. In terms of storage of my yarn, you can see from the top of cupboard one, you may be able to see that mostly I keep my yarns in individual plastic bags. Now, I realise plastic is a bad thing, but it is a good way of keeping it moth-proof. And the bags are reusable. So once I've used yarn, I'll put another skein in the bag. I keep the individual bags in the individual skeins in those bags, so that if moths get into one, as I think they've done with that merino, they hopefully won't spread. That's the theory. The downside, of course, is that once you've got those bags in a cupboard, they just slide all over the place, so I never have a tidy looking stash. Hopefully it's relatively moth free. So my plan for this year is not to buy any more yarn. Since I made that plan, my husband, who is a dear and wonderful man, bought me some, which I'll show you later in the podcast, because who doesn't love a bit of stash acquisition? But as I say, my goal is not to buy any yarn. It's a bit like a smoker who never buys cigarettes but bums them off everyone else. That's kind of how I'm going to go. I've got a lot of yarn to use, got a lot of ideas, far too many. My brain is like a computer with too many tabs open, which is the way of all crafters, I think. But the hope is to use up stuff, combine things in an imaginative and creative way. Some will be my own patterns, probably more will be patterns that I find. And I hope you find it an enjoyable process, and maybe you'll use some of your stash up too. We're all in this together, knitters, crocheters, crafters. We're all in it together. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a recent finished object. And it is a very large Faroese shawl. The room that I'm recording in is my office, and it can get a bit nippy in the winter. So I wanted a shawl. I've just realised I've shown you the wrong side. Let's go with the right side, that'll be much more effective. So I wanted a shawl that I could just sling over my shoulders, something light but warm. And this is what I have. I chose a Faroese shawl, and this is based on the Leftovers Faroese pattern, and I'll put the details up on screen. For two reasons. Firstly, I like the shape of it. It has a central panel, but also it has shaped shoulders. It has decreases around the shoulder, so it then stays on better. It's not a shawl that's forever slipping off. And the other reason is to do with my style of knitting and my attention span, which is not always huge. And the beauty of the Faroese shawl, or this particular pattern, is that you start at the bottom. So although I had 500 stitches to cast on with, that was when I was enthusiastic. You decrease 2 stitches in each side panel every right side row, so you're forever decreasing and having smaller rows as to work on. And that appeals to me because when I start to get bored, I want the thing to grow quicker. So that was the reason for choosing it, and I'm really pleased with how it's come out. I put a few beads in the bottom, don't know if you can see that. I was hoping they would add to the weight. To be honest, they haven't really done a lot from that point of view, but they give it a bit of sparkle, bit of light. The Leftovers Faroese original pattern is quite plain. It's mostly in stocking stitch and garter stitch. I knew that that wouldn't work for me because I would get bored. So I decided to add some detail. Now this lace, candlelight lace, I have always liked. There is something about it that just has always appealed to me. So I thought I'd put that in, and then a central panel. And these are all lace patterns that I've picked up from stitch directories. So I've got the Barbara Walkers, I've got some that I've had for, oh gosh, 30 years probably more. And I like to go through them and just look for ideas. Now the yarns, I have written it all down. The first one, so the one at the bottom, is Yarn Garden UK Sock in a colourway called Cootamundra Wattle, as you do. About 3 years ago, I think it was, there was a really well curated yarn festival in Brighton, which is about an hour away from where I live. And it was in a room, there was probably no more than 25 stalls, but they were all really good. And that's where I got that yarn from. The second one, yes, there are two in here, although they're very similar in colour, is from iKnit. It's called iKnit or Dye Rubber Sole. I don't have the colourway name, but you can see it's kind of yellowy green. Perfect. I then had a bit of a false start because I had a skein of Lamington Lass yarn, which is absolutely beautiful, and one of the colours really matched in with these yellowy greens, greeny yellows, and I thought that would work well. However, I did about 3 or 4 rows and the colour variation in it was too patchy for me. It wasn't that it was pooling in big blobs or anything like that, but it was just too much of a contrast. And this is going to sound stupid because I then went from too much of a contrast to a complete contrast, but I wanted to not have too much of a patterning in the yarn, particularly with the lace stitches. So I decided to go plain, and the next block is some alpaca yarn that a friend of mine has, a friend, good to know, who has alpaca, and a couple of years ago I got some of her yarn. It's an undyed 100% alpaca yarn, really soft, really like it. As I was then on an alpaca tip, bearing in mind the first two are merino, or merino and silk, I then had, and again there are a couple, you can just about see the stripe line, this was just using up some alpaca in the stash. So they're both artisano, both 100% alpaca, just two different colourways that were just in the stash left over from other projects. So that's my Faroese shawl. I have used it a lot, I have worn it a lot, and it has inspired me to make another shawl, which I shall show you in another episode, because I am not a very monogamous knitter. I am a bit of a knitting slapper, to be honest, and have a lot of projects on the go. So I'm not going to show them all because I'll bore myself, let alone boring you. So we'll leave it at that. Now, crafting is not just for garments, it's for the home too. And I am making a curtain. This is very glamorous. It's for my downstairs loo. I have a small dog. You may hear her. She barks sometimes. However, back to my downstairs doodah. The house, we moved in 3 years ago. We had the downstairs loo put in. It had previously been a corridor. We reused a door, which has a glass window in it. So I very quickly put together a curtain made from some very fine sort of, twill sort of cloth. That's not the right word. Toile is probably the right word. Anyway, net meshy stuff. Thinking, I'll redo that. Well, that was over 3 years ago and I haven't yet, but I am still working on it. There is a lovely pattern in the banisters in our house, and I wanted to replicate it, and my thought was to do a filet crochet curtain replicating the pattern to kind of echo across the hallway. Couple of problems with it. Filet crochet is lovely, but unless you're working at a very, very fine gauge, it is quite a broad brushstroke for doing a pattern. And I'll be perfectly honest, I was worried that the pattern I was trying to replicate would end up looking like something rather phallic. And I know it is the downstairs doodah, but I really didn't want that on the windows. So instead I'm going for a plain stem, and then I'll just do the tulip at the top. Of course, the other thing is this is there for discretion. This is there so that people can't see in the window. So we don't really want too big viewing area. We want it to be fairly unsee-throughable, and I know that's not a word. So here we go. Here it is. So there'll be 3 tulips. They'll have the heads on them as I get towards the top. This is upside down. And because it's a kind of Art Deco-y style thing, I've also got a fan pattern going in there, just to keep it interesting and stop it being all tulips, basically. This is using some of the oldest yarn in my stash, which is a white cotton, as you can see, that I bought from Lidl 10 years ago. Now I know that there are possibly people watching this who are thinking, 10 years ago? Pwah, nothing. And I know that I've probably got stuff in the stash that's older than that. But this is the sort of thing I've been talking about, that it really brings home to me how I just accumulate this stuff and not use it. So I'm trying to use it now. I'm doubling up the cotton with another plain white cotton, which is slightly thinner, and this is called Whoosh. And I just got this at a local craft shop, initially intending it for something else, but that's often the way with me as well. I do have sometimes an idea of what I'm going to do with a yarn when I buy it, and then that gets completely abandoned. So that's a project using the oldest stuff in my stash. Now, other works in progress include newer acquisitions. I love a bargain. Who of us doesn't? And last year I was weak. I was very weak. Not only did a local yarn shop close, and it was a really nice yarn shop, I was very sad to see it go. I only went because someone retired. It wasn't a liquidation sale or anything like that. But they were a good yarn shop because they did a wide range. You could get cheap acrylic, and you could get good big name brands as well. So I went in when they were at, I think, 40% off. They didn't have much Noro left by the time I came out. I've got quite a bit of that. And I also got quite a bit of baby yarn. I seem to have known lots of people having babies recently. All boys for some reason. But I thought baby yarn is always useful because people like baby things. And I like making them because they're small. And so you finish them quickly. The other purchases that I made were from a liquidation sale, and this was the demise of Texair yarns. Now, I had a soft spot for Texair yarns. I'd bought things from them at the Ali Pali show and also at the Harrogate show. I also bought things from them, and they saved my bacon somewhat because they were able to supply some yarn, including the same dye lot, which made me very happy for the particular project I was working on. So I had a soft spot for them. Always sorry to see a yarn company go. And a lot of their supplies went to a yarn shop that's not far from me. And they are selling this stuff. They've still got some, and I keep resisting now. But they are selling this stuff at such a cheap rate. These cones are going for 50p a cone. And if you buy 10 of them, which is really no problem. So you can see in cupboard number 1 behind me, a selection of cones. And I am currently making a cardigan using their silk. So this is their Dynasty silk. I've got it in a range of colours, and as is my way, I don't have enough to do all of the cardigan in the same combination of colours, but I don't care. So I'm working with 4 strands of Dynasty silk, and I'm also working with this, which is Little Knitting Company Top 50. Really nice soft yarn. I like the colours. I do have a ball of it in this, a much stronger colourway as well, but for these purposes I wanted the soft one. Again, there's not going to be enough of this, but I do have somewhere, I think in cupboard number 2, a ball of white mohair, similar type of thing to this, but white. So when I run out of this, I will use the white. So, with all the strands together, this is what I am making. It's a drops pattern. It's called Come Over Here. And I really like the way the colours are working together. The blue and the red together remind me of 1950s Formica kitchens. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, but I like it. I like the way that's working. Now come over here is, in the original, a fairly straightforward cardigan, crew neck, with a moss border. I fancied something a bit different. I fancied an asymmetrical cardigan. I just wanted to button up here and down. So I've reworked the maths and that's what we've got. So this is the front of my cardigan. So it will come about kind of there. And I'm looking forward to how this is turning out. It's on quite small needles. I think I'm on 3.25s, which is quite small for me. So it is going to be a slow process. But I'll keep plodding on, a few rows at a time, and we're all good. Next thing I'm going to talk about is a cowl that throughout this recording I call the Merry Cowl, and I apologise to Heather Anderson Designs because it's actually called the Joyful Cowl. I'm going to call it Simon Cowl. And it's the Merry Cowl by Heather Anderson Designs. And I found it via the Scrap Happy or the Stash Knit Down threads on Ravelry, and I really like it. I'm using up some Fibre Space Scrumptious, which I've had for a while, and to give you an example of how my stash grows, the plum, which is my top colour here, is yarn that I used for a pattern which was in Let's Knit in April 2010. A pair of gloves called Musetta Opera gloves. I was quite pleased with them. They start at the cuff and you work at the provisional cast on at the cuff, work a pair of gloves as normal, then pick up the stitches to go up the arm. So quite adaptable in that sense as to how long you want them to be. Yes, so they are called Musetta and they used Fibre Space Scrumptious 4-ply weight in the plum. My husband, whom I love dearly, is an enabler. He knows that I like yarn. He knows that I'm not keen on jewellery or lots of stuff like that. So if he goes away, he quite often comes home with yarn. He's a very nice man. So he's got me some other colours. So we've got this lovely pink, we've got this, and we've got this lovely dark blue. Now I used all of them in a shawl for a friend. I've got a friend who's a bit poorly at the moment, fingers crossed for her, and made her a shawl, which I'm about to show you, and really loved the way it all felt, but it did leave me with leftovers, as is the way. So when I saw the Merry Cowl, I thought this is a good opportunity. So I started off with the blue. It's a mystery cowl, so I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I started off with the navy blue. And the other good thing about this pattern is it made me try new techniques. I tend to follow my own patterns, or things like the Ann Bud, where you have the number of stitches and you just go from there. I don't really do a lot of different techniques. So when it says cast on 50 stitches, I cast on 50 stitches, and I've got books. This is my library of knitting books, and there are so many different ways of casting on, casting off, but I tend to do the ones I'm safe with. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with doing it. It works, but it's always good to kind of expand the horizons. So a lot of the stuff that I'm doing for the first time, people who've been knitting for a very short space of time will probably be thinking, how come you haven't done that yet? That seems so basic. But this is just the way I've knitted and the things that I've made. So the beginning of the cowl is an I-cord cast on, which I'd never done before. I was tempted to follow the alternative instruction, which was just cast on the number of stitches and work in stocking stitch, because the thought of doing a long I-cord made me feel that I would get bored very quickly. And had it been for the bottom of a sweater, I might have done, because that would have been a much longer I-cord. But for the cowl, it was great. So I-cord cast on, picked up the stitches. The other thing that is in this pattern, and there are other stages of it to follow, so there are more things to look forward to, is the German short rows. It's a shaped cowl and it has German short rows, and I'm just trying to find, and they're so well hidden it's really hard to see where the shaping happens, so that's probably not that great for showing you, but you can see that it's a shaped cowl. You can see there's a shaped piece to it. So really pleased. It's my new favourite short row technique. No more wrapping and turning for me. Really happy with this. It's also using up the yarn quite nicely. Now the original pattern gives you yardage per colour, I think 5 different colours. I'm not going to do that because I've got 4 colours of scrumptious and varying amounts. So I've used up all the plum in that bottom. Well, I say used it up, I have this much left. So this will go in the scrap pile. I'm working out what to do with the scraps, but this will be unwound from this failed experiment and put in the scrap bowl. So. One other thing I must just show you is where this cowl lives. And this is a bag. It was bought from Knitting Goddess, and it was bought for me as a birthday gift last year by the lovely Amy of Stranded Dyeworks and her mum. I'm just going to put this up without comment. I mentioned near the beginning of the podcast that my husband is an enabler, and he bought me some yarn. It's one of the many reasons why I love him. He was out and about in a town not that far from us. I had a text saying, did you know there's a yarn shop here? I said, oh no, any good? He's very well trained. We were in a shop once on holiday and I picked up a ball of yarn and said, that's pretty. And he said, yes, is it Norrow? Young Jedi, I have trained you well. So he came back and I jokingly said in my text back to him, don't spend too much. He then replied, would a couple of balls of Norrow and some other yarn be okay? How does that sound on your yarn diet? To which my reply was, of course, delicious. So let's see what he's bought me, which is a very kind thing. He doesn't do this every week. He's not the reason I have a large stash. That's my own yarn greed, not his. So our first yarn is some Malabrigo, and it is Malabrigo lace. Very pretty. I have a lot of blues in my cupboard. It's sort of one of the colours I go for. Not so many greens, but always nice to have new. And this doesn't have a dye lot, but it does have a colourway number 416. I'm going to mispronounce that. Indicita. I have no idea, but it's very pretty, as you can see. So nice choice there. He then also got me, they had some Noroteu on offer, on special price. So he got me a ball of this blue and grey, which looks really nice. Got a few brighter colours in there, hiding, as you can see. This all looks rather disgusting, the way I'm pulling the middle out. But you can see there's some nice turquoise in amongst the blue and the grey. And he also got me a couple of balls, again of a grey base, but with colour hiding within it, and more birthing the yarn baby, apologies. But you can see there's some green and some brown, some pinks and purples in there. So I shall look forward to having a go with this, because it's a bit of a mystery knitting with it and makes it more interesting. As you may have guessed, I love knitting, I love crochet, but I do get a bit bored with doing the same thing time and again. So I do like to have a bit of variety, be that in the colours that I'm using, the stitches that I'm working on, or just the way the pattern's going. I really like sweaters that have great swathes of stocking stitch. I think they look incredibly nicely made and elegant, but I also know that that's not for me as a general rule. I need something else to do at the same time. Part of my work requires me to check things from the computer periodically. Quite often, and I have projects on the go that I knit whilst I'm doing that, because I don't need to look at my knitting and I can just knit through and the things will grow almost without me realising. So one of those to follow in a later episode, but at the moment just know that I'm deeply shallow, easily bored, and frankly should have grown out of it by now, but I'm afraid I haven't, so I think it's probably unlikely that I will. One of the things that wanted to talk about was where I craft. As you can see, I'm in my car. I'm currently between appointments, and this is where I do a surprising amount of craft work. There's a blanket on my spare bed which was called the While I'm Waiting blanket, and it's made up of hexagons which I did between appointments when I had 5 minutes here and there. And it took a few years, but it got done. So every little helps, as a large supermarket says. Having finished that blanket, really didn't want to make another one. It did take a long time. So I've moved on to other things. Now, when I'm in the car, I always have my box of tricks with me. Hopefully you can see that. And currently there is a magic ball, which I've made up of all bits of green. Now, these have all come from a drawer in my office. It's underneath cupboard 2. And the drawer is full of samples, swatches, things that worked and didn't, stitch samples. When I've done designs for magazines, I send them a sketch of the design and also a photograph of a stitch sample, so the editor can have a feel of what the item will look like once it's finished. They've all ended up in a drawer to be sorted out one day. Well, I sorted out all the green stuff and put it all in, Russian joined it all together, put it all in a ball for just this purpose. I make 2 things in the car. I mean, the real thing is that they're easy to remember, easy to pick up and put down type patterns. The first thing, and this is what I've got on the go at the moment, is a twiddle muff. Great name. So I don't know how much of that you can see. Basically, the twiddle muff is, from a construction point of view, 12 inches by 24, so that's 30 centimetres by 60 roughly. And once that's made, you then decorate it with lots of buttons, beads, anything that will add a nice bit of texture and a bit of interest. Once you've done that, you fold it in half and then you sew it into a tube. And it's for people with dementia and Alzheimer's, so I'm going to donate these to local nursing homes. And there's been some research to find that having something to do with their hands really helps people with those conditions be calmer if they're getting agitated or anxious. So that's what I'm doing that for. It's also great that it's, from a maker's point of view, that you can use up the odd buttons in the button tin, the bits of ribbon, those little bits and pieces that you want to do something useful with, but they're never really going to go into a project on their own. So it's a really useful thing to do, and it's a great kind of stash busting and more than just yarn stash busting. Now, I have done one in the past. That was a knitted one, and when I didn't have a magic ball, when I ran out of individual bits of yarn, I then did like a little flap in the piece of yarn that I had left and then started a new row on that. So that's the thing, you can knit in or crochet in the bits of interest. It's a great way to use up the novelty yarns, the eyelash, that sort of thing, because it will add good texture. The one that I did before was, well, hideous to look at, frankly, because it's all different colours and different textures. Given what it's going for, I don't think hideous is a problem, because hopefully it's interesting to feel, which is what it's all about. Given that this is to make twiddle muffs, great name, you can wonder why I've bothered to put all of one colour together. Well, the reason for that is I don't just use the magic ball for those. I'm also, when I'm not making twiddle muffs, making hats for homeless people. And while I appreciate that warmth is probably the key when you're dealing with homeless people, and actually they don't care what it looks like as long as it's warm, I still don't think there's any need to look like a clown's thrown up over their head. So that's why I've gone for all shades of one colour, just to give it a bit of something that's not quite so scrappy, even though it is. So hopefully that'll be useful. I've got a friend who does work for a local homeless charity, so I'm going to donate to him for their use. So yeah, I'm in the car between appointments. I've got about 5-10 minutes, so I shall do a bit of crochet in a minute. And yeah, this is quite normal for me. In the car, bit of rocket fuel to keep me going, and the radio on usually. And this is where I craft a lot. I have another finished object. Here it is. I said that I like baby items because they're quick, and here is a piece made for the baby of a friend of mine. The baby is due in about a month, but as her elder son came about 2 weeks early, wouldn't surprise me if the new arrival wasn't on the swift side either. The pattern it's a drops pattern, and it's called Little Explorer, and I made it in I think the second size, which is 0 to 1 month rather than the Prem size. Haven't blocked it yet, which is why the sleeves are looking a bit skew-whiff, but all good. Couple of modifications. Firstly, I think the sleeves were initially worked in the round, but I was finding that a bit faffy. I work in the round quite a lot, but it's not the only way to work, so I have seamed the sleeves. The other thing is the pattern suggested a crochet edging, and I didn't bother with that. I feel that my selvage edge, which I hope you can see, is quite neat. It's my standard selvage, so I purl the last stitch of a row and slip knitwise the first stitch of a row, and I do this so automatically with everything that I'm knitting that if the pattern calls for anything different, then I have to really stop and think about it, because my muscle memory is to slip after I've purled. So I didn't bother with the crochet edge because I felt that was a neat edge, and the crochet would add weight, which I feel might sort of weigh things down a bit. The pattern originally called for a drops yarn, hardly surprising as it's a drops pattern. I think it was for baby merino, which is a sport weight yarn. This is actually some yarn that I bought in Aldi, the supermarket. It's called So Crafty. It's a double knitting weight, but I got gauge with a fairly fine needle, and it gives a nice dense fabric. Given that we're in winter, it's nice that this will hopefully be a warm sweater for little lad when he comes. It's a 78% cotton, 22% acrylic mix, and it has a nice feel to it. Quite soft, but not too firm. Really nice yarn and nice stiff stitch definition, which, given that we have the cable, it's nice to be able to see it and it doesn't get lost in a halo of fuzz or anything like that. Also, the buttons I was very pleased with. Hopefully you can see those. They are actually made by Cowl, as in the yarn company. I saw them in a shop. It's a shop that sells King Cowl yarns amongst other things, and it's not a pound shop, but it's one of those kind of discount stores. And I saw the buttons on a rack and I thought, well, I have a lot of baby things to make, so I shall buy them. And I'm glad I did, because this pattern required 4 and there were 4 on the pack, so very happy with that. I'm hoping that my friend likes this. It's a machine washable yarn, which is key. We all have our favourite fibres. I love anything soft. I love merino, cashmere, silk. I'm not a cheap date when it comes to yarn. I'm just tactile, I think, and I like soft, smooth fibres. Sometimes I've been to places and you go into the local yarn shop and there are exhibits of our local yarn, and it's really scratchy, quite rustic wool. And much as I admire it, and it may be a beautiful colour, I know that I'm not going to knit with it if I don't like the feel of it. I know I'm not going to wear it if I feel it's scratchy. So I tend not to buy if it's that type of yarn. However, fitness for purpose is the key thing. This is for a small baby who will dribble and throw up and do all the things that babies do. So the important thing is it's got to be slung in the washing machine, because I can't see my friend standing to hand wash this. I can't see her thanking me if she thought she had to, but I'm hopeful that this will be quite a practical, durable sort of garment for little man when he's here. So again, that's Little Explorer drops pattern, made with So Crafty, a yarn which, according to Ravelry, has now been discontinued, but it came from Aldi, and I really like the way it feels and it looks. Thank you again for stopping by. Hope you've enjoyed the first episode of Not Quite Enough Yarn. As I said at the beginning, probably be a monthly podcast. I don't really have enough crochet, knitting, craft content to make it more regular than that, and I'm not sure anyone could stand it, so I like to be kind. If you have any questions or queries, do please add them to the comments below. I will also put on links for patterns and so forth that I'm working on if you're interested. In the coming month, I hope that whatever you start working on brings you excitement, whatever you continue working on brings you satisfaction, and whatever you finish brings you joy. Thanks again. Look forward to seeing you soon.